Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Nova Holistic, episode 12 with Robbie Swale. My name is Diana, and here we are doing another round of these amazing conversations where we take a deeper dive into a person's journey, their heart, their mind, and take the journey of meaning, of a life meaning, of purpose, and see what we uncover about Robbie today. Welcome, Robbie. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, I say only okay because I have been a little ill. Like I'm in the UK and it's winter and everybody is a little bit ill at the moment. But generally, I'm good. I feel good. It's lovely to be here and really appreciating getting to have this time with you to dive in.
Amazing. Thank you. So let's begin then. I would love it if you would start um, on a high. But tell us about your passion. Tell us about where you are today, who you are today. What is it that makes your heart and your mind driven, open, centered, focused?
That's a great question. Well, there's a lot of great questions in there, I think. So let me do a tiny bit of kind of normal intro, and then I'll actually answer the question. So there's a way in which well, let me give the normal intro, but partly by answering the question. So in a way, how I got where I am now was to try and open up those things you've just been talking about for myself. How do I drive myself? How do I find more passion? How do I get more energy that I love into my life? How do I find work that allows me to do that? And that journey has ended up with me doing a variety of things. A lot of it is, and where I make my money is through coaching, working with people one-to-one, sometimes in groups. But I also am a creator. So I write and I make podcasts and various other things. And one of the things at the moment, one of the things that came to mind as you were asking that question is I think, it's been a bit of a journey for me to connect with the impact that I make. So I can connect with it in the moment. And that's one of the reasons I love coaching people, because I get to be there with them in the moment and I get to see the impact of the work and really dance with them and be very present and do, uncover things that are very meaningful for them. But one of the things that I've been really trying to connect with is how can I find that same meaning from my other work? And one of the things that gives me, so from the writing I do, from the podcasts I make, that's a little bit more detached. And so to really get the passion from that, I love the creation. But one of the interesting things for me has been to try and work out, well, what's the most meaningful impact I'm having on people when I'm not there? Which is a wonderful thing to think about, that we can have impact on people when we're not there. It's one of the things the internet makes so much easier. And for me at the moment, the thing that is most meaningful to me about that is in this area around creativity, helping people make things. So one of the things I love the most is when I hear from somebody who says, I've been meaning or wanting to do this thing for a long time, and then I came across your work and now I've finally done it. And that's one of the most meaningful things that I can hear. And I love it. It doesn't matter what that thing is. Maybe it's somebody starting a business or writing a book, but maybe it's one of my friends told me that he gave my book to one of his friends from church, and she they've got this construction project on the house that they've been wanting to do for ages, and she's just been avoiding it. And she read my book and has finally started working on the kitchen extension. And it's for me, that's just as meaningful as anything else, because I know how having those things hanging over us can create such a kind of hell. Creative hell is one of the ways I think about it inside us. So that's one of the things that really gets, I'm really passionate about at the moment.
Okay. So I wrote some things down that as you were talking, coaching, in the moment, dance, impact, writing, podcast, meaningful, impact when we're not there, creativity. You speak a really beautiful language. And this is the kind of language that, to be completely transparent, is not something that comes out of the mouths of men. Right? There's much of this, what you say, is at the very least a combination of intellectual language, like as in mind, analytical, left brain language, but equally heart-centered, present in the moment, right-brained language, such as, meaningful creativity. Meaningful things also suggest that your work has a connection with your heart. And so I'm really wanting to unpack that a little bit more. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, or start with maybe a story of how you got to be this version of Robbie today.
I think there's like, in a way, there are so many stories that could be told about that, because it's a story of my life, right?
Yep.
It's like everything adds up to that. But and more recently, it's been a more conscious attempt to integrate all those parts. But we could look right back to the early parts of my life. In some ways, I think that's the most interesting place. So my parents were interested in all of those things that you've just been talking about, and they were interested in the intellectual, but they were also interested in the heart. They both had backgrounds in doing their own holistic work on themselves and supporting others to do that. And I had a very interesting first few, perhaps. So I was home educated until I was 9. So I had this very interesting first 8 or 9 years, where longer than some people would have, even with those parents, where not really because of money, we didn't have much money, but just they were able to they made choices, which meant that they were able to be around me for a long time in my development. And what I would say is that allowed some of the development that you're talking about. This is the way that I make meaning out of it, right? I don't know for sure that this is what made that happen, right? Who knows? But the way I make meaning of that period of my life is that that allowed the intuitive, heart-centered part of me much more space than and time to develop and flourish than I think I would have got had I been put into school at an earlier stage. Not because the teachers are bad, just because they're not the same as my mum and dad were. They weren't and wouldn't have been able to give me the space and time in that way, and wouldn't necessarily have had the skills, let alone the time with 25 other kids or whatever it would have been. Now, of course, then I had to move into an education system which is not really set up to allow, particularly let's hypothesize, particularly the hearts of little boys to open and flourish. And I had to do that age 9, and that was not an easy period of my life, and that required a lot of adjustment and adaptiveness. The adaptiveness that I would have had to develop aged 4 or 5 if I'd gone to school at that time. I had to develop aged 8 or 9. In some ways that's easier because I'm older. In some ways it's harder because I'm the only kid having to do that, versus at 4 at least all the kids are freaking out about going to school. But I think there we get those two things you're pointing at, right? The intellectual mind head led stuff and the heart led stuff.
And so what I'm then interested in is, having had that beautiful foundation of that sort of more holistic, integrative way of being at an early age. And then, there's that period of adaptiveness, going to public schools, etc. How did you go with keeping that foundation alive? Or did you?
Well, I don't think I thought about it as an 8 or 9-year-old, right? It's like survival is what you think about when you're
Sure.
an 8-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
a 9-year-old who's going to school, who doesn't understand school, who doesn't understand the people don't understand him because he's a weird 9-year-old who's never been to school. It's just survival, really. It's like, how do I not get laughed at? How do I not get bullied and picked on? How do I make sense of these rules that I don't understand that seem stupid to me? That's what was actually going on. It's like, how do I survive? Later on, like when I look, if I look back, I can tell you where that was nourished in the intervening years before relatively recently, I started to actively think about these two parts of myself. It was nourished by all forms of creativity. So it was nourished by the games I would play, often by myself, but sometimes with friends, imaginative games. It was nourished by stories. Later, it was nourished and practiced. So I had semi-accidentally, but what's accidental in life? I started acting in plays when I was 11 at school, and so it was nourished. But that was my only real, like, in some ways not quite, but almost my only hobby between the age of about 11 and the age of about 25. So it's where I made all my friends, and this part that the intuitive, the presence, all that kind of thing was absolutely practiced in those ways at those times.
Through that. Isn't it so interesting? And I don't want to be directive, but I just want to highlight something that I'm observing from and what I'm hearing you say. With my work, I mean, it's all about that holistic approach, right? All about that. And when I talk about spirit, people often think there's still a little bit of a stigma that spirit and spirituality is associated with, levitating in the corner somewhere in a Zen monastery.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Or it's associated with crystals, etc. But your story so beautifully demonstrates that human spirit and spirituality, therefore, is nurtured through, in your instance, through this process of being able to be creative, through imagination, through the right side of the brain, through art and expression. It's so beautiful. And then those things give you meaning. Those things give you, that place of belonging because it feels good in here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I just wanted to point that out, because maybe someone that listens to this and thinks that, what a load of shit this holistic thing is, if I have to go and do something that doesn't feel natural to me, like, go and pray and dance to Hare Krishna and all that sort of stuff, that's not at all the case. That spirit, the human spirit, is expressed through spirituality in so many ways, and that intuition and the expression and just that feeling of being in awe of something that could come from, being outside and, having the, the privilege to see an eclipse, for example.
Or even just spectacular mountains one day, or like
My God.
a little bird landing on we've moved recently,
Yeah.
and I'm at a window and this little bird landed on my windowsill outside the other day, and it's like a moment of absolute magic. It just sat there, it pecked my window a couple of times, like quite a common bird in the UK. I think like some kind of finch. I've seen them, fly past me probably 10,000 times in my life, and then there's this little one just there, just for like 25 seconds moving, and is that connection. It's there too, and I completely agree with what you're saying, Diana, and I guess one of the things that I really noticed, in the absence in my life in some ways of connection to what some people to what for much of human history would have provided the kind of spiritual side of someone's development, like organized religion or, kind of wise people that exist in a village or whatever it might be. Those weren't really present in my life. I get really interested looking back at where I did connect to those things. And one of them I spotted was this really interesting one, right? This kind of, so we were talking just before we switched on about how so it's kind of one of the places I go to look after myself when I'm not well is fantasy fiction. And there's a British fantasy novelist who died 15 years ago or so called David Gemmell. And I noticed at one point just how threaded. Now he's a really interesting writer, right? He's down to earth, like it's not flowery writing. It's incredibly direct. It's kind of brutal at times. It's gritty. Like short novels, really easy to read. Lots of people would call it kind of trashy and formulaic, and yet that's only if you look at the very surface. What is in there is like philosophical, spiritual lessons about particularly how to be a man, like also how to be a human, but particularly that. And it's like when I saw that and really noticed it was an amazing thing to see that this, very ordinary man from the south of England who, had no education and, all this amazing story about his life, actually what he's managed to boil down to is some of the like really core lessons of humanity. And then he's dressed them up in these beautifully told page-turning stories. And so it's like, we can find that connection to spirit in all kinds of places. And it's really worth remembering that. And it, like you said, you did this great gesture before, you like, feels good in here. And like, that's a great way of thinking about it for me. It's like, what are the things that make me feel good in there? And then I have to be really careful not to dismiss them, because lots of people would, like, for a long time, I didn't talk much about the fact that I loved fantasy novels, right? Because lots of people would like sneer at it, particularly when I was kind of growing up. It's like, well, now I'm strong enough in myself to look at it and go, well, you're really missing the point if you're sneering at these stories. Like, you're really, really missing something important about humanity that is held in stories.
I happen to, I mean, first of all, I'm also a fan, so I totally concur. Secondly, I've been reading them for, several decades. I hesitate to say, but there's something really magical about that sweet spot within that that can be ignited by one or more things and is felt in the body in whichever way, is individual to each person. I really love that. Thank you for that. I'm so happy to be, I have to tell you, I'm so happy to be having this conversation, truly, because I wouldn't have been having this conversation 10 years ago with anybody. And most certainly there wouldn't have been partners, or very many partners and fathers that were so well-rounded mentally and emotionally and physically and spiritually in the world. And I witness so much more of that these days, regardless of how crap our world looks sometimes these days. Well, a lot of the time. There is just this extraordinary shift and evolution in humanity, in consciousness, that's happening and bubbling just beneath the surface that I think is monumental.
Yeah, why do you think that's happening?
Oh boy, this is a whole another podcast.
Yeah.
But I think there's several reasons. I'll try and keep it short. First of all, Earth itself is going through a part of the galaxy, our solar system, that has a lot of photons. It's called the photon belt. It's somewhere where we haven't been for about 12,000 years. This is actually, I think you can probably, if you Google it, you can actually find this information. And so photons are particles essentially of light. And so more light on the planet equals more illumination, equals stepping out of the shadow into the light, equals we are seeing all the crap, but we are also seeing there's like an awakening. It's like when you've been sleeping and then someone turns the light on and it's bright and you can see more of what's been happening. And so when you see more, then you have more information, more photons to process. And, you know, it's that process of education. When you see it, you know it, you process it, you embody it. So it looks different. So everyone is kind of, you know, coming into the light, if you will. And I don't mean to sound like, you know, Bible-ishy at all, you know, but like literally there's more light on the planet, which then by default creates this interesting evolution, but it's also generational. You know, I think on some level, the generations since the Great Wars have started to realize that maybe something's not really working all that well. The whole industrial evolution, we as humans maybe need to catch up, because, you know, the industrial evolution is moving us so far, but if we are immature and we don't know how to handle it and how to deal with the stuff that we're creating, we're going to destroy ourselves. And then, of course, there is the good old, the emotional body doesn't want to be left behind. And so it's really making a play for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for answering my question. Sorry, I asked you a question on your show.
No, it's fine. I mean, this is all part and parcel. There aren't any rules, I told you. Because it's a really interesting unveiling and deepening of this conversation, isn't it?
Right.
Because what I again absolutely love about this is that I got you. Even if it's for like 1 hour, you're here, and I'm gonna like use this opportunity to really showcase what happens when masculine energy is. This is not to say that I mean, I don't know you well at all. I mean, this is really the first, I mean, we've spoken once, right?
Yeah.
But your language is a representation of what you transmit from within through your, right? It's your sound, it's your frequency, it's your vibration. And your vibration tells a story. And your story tells me that the masculine energy that you embody is quite in balance, and it's healthy, it's harmonious. And I really love that, and I want to explore that more, because my next question, the next thing that I'm really curious about is, so you have this extraordinary harmonious masculine energy balanced within you. It's obviously still masculine, but it speaks and it readily accepts, allows for your creativity, for, you know, for you to be a little bit more gentle rather than warlike, which is just, I mean, it's beautiful. And so then you take that into your business And masculine energy is action oriented. It's the positive charge of the electromagnetic field. Feminine is magnetic and masculine is electric. And so tell me about the application of this new man in business.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I guess on some level, that's who I would hope I'm able to be. And I know there'll be times when all of my energy is not in balance, when the masculine bit is too is like not too masculine, is too, gets out of balance, or the feminine bit gets out of balance. Sure. And I'm kind of aware. I know I can sometimes feel when that happens, and it's not that pleasant. Yeah, sure. I do want to say it does happen to me. But I think it's a really important thing that you point to in business. Masculine energy is really useful in business. Really useful. And sometimes, it's not the only way to do business, for sure, but really useful to have, I would say, really useful to have it to call upon in business for everybody when you need it. For me, let's make it really practical. There's been a few ways that it's really showed up in my business. So one would be, I was really lucky to read a book called The War of Art when I was just starting out my business by Stephen Pressfield. And he talks in that about winning our creative battles and the universal force resistance, which is out there to stop us, which is all the reasons we procrastinate and don't do the things we want to do, and the excuses we make up and all that kind of thing. But what he says in The War of Art is that essentially the way you beat resistance is you turn pro. And this is a masculine energy approach for sure to it. But you basically treat the thing that you really care about, your calling, your art, your relationship, in my case, the business I was starting that felt like it was helping me tap into that passion, as we were talking about at the start. You treat it like you would treat any job, any boring job that you might have. This is one of the Stephen Pressfield things. So you show up when you're supposed to show up, and you leave when you're supposed to leave. And in between that, you do work. You don't no truck drivers get truck drivers block. So why should a writer no truck driver gets up at the start of the day and says, I just don't feel like driving today. So I'm going to stay at home. Just drive the truck like you would if you were a truck driver, or go to, in my case, it's like I could really easily apply it because I'd had some boring office jobs that didn't tap into my passion, that I didn't like. It's like, well, what did I do? Well, I showed up at 9:00 and I was contracted till 5:30. And so I worked till 5:30, but I took an hour's lunch break because I was paid for an hour's lunch break. So I was going to take it because the work was dull. So, I started my business. I sat down at 9:00 and then I worked till about 12 or 12:30 or 1. And then I took an hour off for lunch to relax, to look after myself. And then I'd work from the end of that lunch break until about 5 or 5:30. And then I'd often stop. And that's one of the ways I applied it. It's like, did I do that when I felt like I did that when I felt good? I did that when I felt bad. I did that when I had lots of things to do. I did that when I had no idea what I was going to do. And I would do that every time. Another way. So that's the kind of steadiness approach. One of the things I think about a lot these days is the tortoise and the hare, right? So that's the Pressfield turning pro thing is the steady application of that. I will show up. I will take action. I will force the world and my business to work. And then it's also interesting to think about the what it can look like to use that masculine energy in a shorter, more focused way. And so one way, for example, in my business that I did that is one of my coaches just said this one day. He's like, Robbie, I think you should just have a practice where you invite people into coaching conversations. And because I wanted a successful business, and one of the ways you get a successful business in a business like mine is, well, the business only ever gets successful really if it runs by word of mouth. And what is some ways to make that more likely? Well, coach a lot of people. And what's one of the ways to get people to get to coach a lot of people? Well, it's to say to some people, I'd quite like to coach you as a gift from me. would you be up for that? And finding the right authentic way to say that. And so I did that, and it felt like a lot of action at the time. It doesn't feel like that much to me, but that's because of how much I've changed from doing that kind of action. The challenge was to invite 30 people in a month to have a coaching conversation with me. And I did that challenge, and I did some of them in email and some of them on the phone and some of them in person, and learned an enormous amount from that. And if we think about the kind of integrated energy of that, it worked because I managed to separate the desperation of the outcome from the practice of putting energy out into the world. So obviously the ideal outcome from this challenge of inviting 30 people into coaching conversations was I would have some clients and some people would refer people to me and all that kind of thing. But the reason it was manageable was because it was just enough of a game, and because the practice was, I'm going to practice inviting people. Getting no's is okay. In fact, getting no's is part of it. The aim is to practice inviting people. If I invite 30 people, that's success for this challenge. So it's within my control. The desperation, the neediness is lower. And of course, well, not of course, but in one of the ways when I can look back at that now, one of the things I can see is inviting people into coaching conversations. If I do enough of that, I almost can't help but create some clients in the end. So it's like, it's not a guarantee, with each one, it's as likely as not that someone will say no, probably. I mean, a bit less once I got better at inviting people, at saying it in a nice way and not being too pushy and all that kind of thing. But in the end, if you do enough of it, it's almost can't help but lead to more business.
I'm taking notes again because what you're saying is validating some of my own personal learning around my inner masculine energy. I learned through trial and error, much error, that
lots of error here too, by the way.
Whoa. That I had an extraordinary capacity to tap into into the field of potential and be creative. I have so many ideas. I see potential everywhere. Like literally my world is so magical. And then I would write all of that out. And then I go, now what? Because I don't have a well-developed, grounded masculine energy that knows how to stay focused and take action on these amazing ideas that I'm able to pull in, right? So great feminine, masculine, sucks, right? And and so I've had to, my first thing was a massive aha moment going, well, duh. That's really what it is. And then it was, I couldn't come up with any easy magical answers either. So like what you're saying, it was like nose to the grind, just show up and just keep doing it until, until you learn something and you can do it differently, better. Still, obviously, learning, but I love what you say. And I'm just thinking about kind of in the spirit of, seeing ourselves in that holistic way. Sometimes, I love this because it's fascinating for me, but making time to stop in order to have inner exploration and reflection and sometimes journaling is amazing, because I sort of go through, okay, so let's stick with the emotional body, for example, right? So the feminine energy within my emotional body what's the dictionary there? What is she feeling, right? If I talk to it and in sort of gender terms, of course, not saying that this is about gender at all. I don't even want to go there, but just for the sake of, framing it.
Yeah.
And then, the masculine energy has a voice as well within me, in my emotional body. So what's the masculine energy speaking about? What is it talking to me about? Is there anything I need to hear? Is there anything I need to? And so I think it's amazing. I think that when people can give themselves permission to just have that exploration, inner exploration, and really get to know who they are within themselves, the way they would get to know a friend or a partner, a new partner, or even their new child, or is so important. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I
Feelings.
completely agree. I mean, I think it's worth saying, in the way, so the slowing down, I completely agree. Like whether you do it by yourself or with somebody else, if you're doing it by yourself, having a practice like the one you're talking about is a really cool way of doing it. I've never done that, but I love that idea that you can actually really slow down and listen to the masculine parts of you or the feminine parts of you. And we all have both, right? And that energy is available to both of us. I love the idea of that. I had to do work to, in a way, because of a lot of, I mean, some people might not like this and you might not, I don't know. Like the way certainly my experience was that there weren't a lot of stories about what positive, integrated masculine energy looks like. And my dad actually is a really good example of this. And still, I found it really hard. Given my personal view is, given the stories the society tells about men a lot of the time, it's quite hard to work out, like, what is it like for me to be masculine in a way that is meaningful and good. And so I had to do quite a lot of work to let those parts of me out more. That's been a part of my work over the last 10 years. And the reason I'm saying this is I think that that kind of practice that you're talking about, it's like if someone's watching or listening to this and thinking like, what the hell is this? Like, what are they talking about? Like, this investigation is worth something to most people, because we don't have, like, certainly in the UK, we're not, and you kind of hinted at it about the gender stuff. It's like, we're really bad at talking about masculinity and femininity, really bad at it as societies. And that means that people may not know what we're talking about, and they don't know the benefits of slowing down and thinking about this even a little bit. And the benefits for me have been, let's like hit a few. Feeling much better in myself is one. Being able to function better as a human in the world, right? I used to be super indecisive, and then I just realized that this was a way for me to practice masculine energy, was practicing being decisive. I read it in a book by a guy called David Dada, who's a fantastically polarizing character. And like, it was a wonderful thing to practice and to just feel, what's it like? And if people want, you can, as I understand it, you can look into what happens to the hormonal balance in, say, a man when he practices the things that we traditionally ascribe to the masculine, is that the hormonal balance improves. And so actually stress can go down. I am not a researcher, so I want to really say this, but as I understand it, the research shows that pretty clearly. Of course, my intimate relationship improved enormously as I was able to manage the masculine sides of me more. My business undoubtedly improved, right? So my ability to run a business almost certainly is improved by the ability to kind of play in these spaces, but also understand that if I'm going to be the best, for example, in my case, coach, but it would apply to whatever job people are doing. If I'm going to be the best coach that I can be, I'm going to need to integrate and use the things that I have. And one of the things that I have that some people don't have as much because they're women is a masculine energy. And it's like, if I'm not using that, then just like if they're not allowing the feminine parts of themselves to really run when they're coaching, then if I'm not using that directness and the decisiveness and what did you call it? The like, or so I've heard people call it as the lightning bolt of the sacred masculine. Like if I'm not using that sometimes, then that's a whole strength that I have that's not getting tapped into. So the reason I'm saying all this is to invite people who are listening, who in some way are having their curiosity piqued by this conversation that we're having. It is worth, like that exercise that you just described, Deanna, like that would be a cool way for somebody to do it. It's just sit down and when they're faced, like a good time to do it might be faced with a situation they're not sure how to approach. Like, what does my inner feminine say about what I could do in this situation? And what does my inner masculine say? And just write about it. That's it. That would be a really cool practice to do, to start tapping into these things. And of course, well, not of course, I always say that. And of course, but no, it is of course. And of course, if you want to read about it, many people have written things about this kind of thing. You can if you put it into Amazon, you'll get all kinds of things. And they'll have some fantastic 5-star reviews and 1-star reviews, which you can then decide which you listen to.
So, yeah, I mean, okay, so I'm a highly visual. So my world runs on like a movie screen, like whether I'm visualizing, whether I'm, like downloading potential of being creative, everything I see is in color and it's like watching a movie, right? Everything, which is like perfect for me. So it feels like I'm in this perpetual wonderland, on most days. It doesn't have to be like that, right, for everybody. But it's because some people are more auditory than visual. So I just wanted to, just to expand on what you are suggesting, which absolutely couldn't agree more. If a person is, say, more auditory, they could literally connect within and then talk into the phone and just record, and they'll process through the auditory channels. Or a kinesthetic person, so someone that learns through doing, might want to write. Yeah. Sometimes I just color.
If people are slightly wackier, you might want to sit down for a minute and think well, where's the most masculine place in my house?
Yeah.
And then go and sit in that and say, from here, what would I do with the situation I'm facing?
Thing.
What would my masculine part say? What's the most feminine place in my house? And if I go and sit there for a while and, allow that, there are lots of ways to do it. It's a really good point that you're making. These kind of practices, my brother, he used to play it with his head, heart, and gut as those 3 centers. He used to go for I don't know if he still does this, for a walk, and he'd be like, okay, and he'd do the talking into the phone. That's the way he would process it. If I was doing it, I'd probably write. I process a lot of stuff by writing, or I'd speak it out, right? Like I also have, having conversations with people, I find very, very valuable. And look, the most powerful thing I've ever done for tapping into my masculine energy was go on a men's retreat. And I think that if people want to really do the deep work, then, the organization in the UK that's been doing a lot of good work in that, they're kind of changing at the moment, that the one that I went on, but there are lots of organizations like that out there. And that's a really powerful way of kind of spending some time thinking about these things.
Do you know what I just thought, Robbie? This was for you, my darling. I've heard, of course, men holding space for other men in groups, like group work. But what I've never heard anyone do yet, and it just popped into my head, if you were to hold, say, an online group, right? A man facilitating a group, teaching women how to connect better with their masculine, inner masculine. Right? I just think that would be fascinating.
Yeah,
and maybe vice versa, like a woman, holding space and facilitating a group for men learning to connect more with their inner feminine energy.
Interesting.
And we are
again,
not talking about heels and balls. We are talking about energy flow. We are talking about, charge, energy charge, frequency, vibration. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're having this conversation, and this is where we've got to. Like, I'm noticing that probably some of the time in my business, that's actually what I'm doing. So for example, we haven't really talked about it, but another, I could have answered if I'd been kind of really on my marketing, like if I had a media manager, they'd have been like, when you said, how do you bring masculine energy into your business? They'd have been like, talk about the 12-minute method, Robbie. So let me do like a really high level version of that, because I guess I think that's probably what that's doing.
Okay.
So basically one of the things that I accidentally did partly, I guess is so in the frame of this conversation, my coach Joel and I designed a practice. It was about sharing myself with the world. And so you could frame that as, this is a masculine practice, right? It's like, here I am. Now that's not what I was thinking about at the time particularly, but you could frame it like that. And the practice was write an article on the train. I had a short train journey, proofread it once and post it online, and do that 5 times in the next 2 weeks. That was the game. And we did that. And then after a while, I decided to make it a weekly practice. And so I've been writing an article in that way every week for the last 6.5 years. Now I set a timer for 12 minutes, which is roughly how long the train journey was, because I don't get the train anymore. And this is a small, in a way, I guess what this is it's saying, use it, even if everything feels too much. So there's now 300 odd of those blog posts. If people are interested, the first 3 years of that, 3 years, 12 minutes a week, I wrote 80,000 words. And that's actually how I wrote my 4 books. So if people want to read the books, they were written 12 minutes a week over 3 years. And so in a way, I guess what I'm seeing in this conversation is that is all a way of taking, like, look, you don't have to use a huge amount of masculine energy, but if you take a tiny bit of what you've got and you just sit down and you just do the work for 12 minutes a week, and that's all you do, that's all the willpower that you can muster. If you do that every week, and that's the way you leverage that bit of like will, then after 3 years, you might have something magical. And so I guess I'm just catching that for a lot of people is probably what that is on some level. It's, here's a way of tapping into the masculine energy, using it in service of whatever the thing is that's important to you. And I get it, as a little aside, I probably get it. I run a group program for coaches. There may be some element of, that's mixed group, mixed genders, but there isn't some element of masculine energy in some of the group work that I do, I think. Obviously there's energy for me, but there may be some energy in helping people tap into it as well in the right way for them.
And do you know what I think is really magical is when you and people that you work with are aware that this is what they are doing and they're consciously choosing it. That's the sweet spot, right?
Right. So that's the level at which that's the level at which your suggestion or your gift to me there of the group program idea is not happening at the moment. I'm not saying in anywhere, this is what we're gonna help you do. Yeah, really interesting. Well, and I think just to loop back to what I was saying before and to kind of emphasize it for anyone, what you just said is really important, right? For anyone to, I think what's interesting about it, isn't it? I'm just noticing that when I was practicing explicitly using masculine energy, it was really important, meaningful, and transformational for me. And I think that's partly because of what you've just said, in a way, but part of it is like by definition, because as soon as you've acknowledged that you've consciously said, I'm going to practice using my masculine energy here. Like, I'd also like, for people who don't like those terms, like there are lots of other ways you can talk about this. You can talk about order and chaos or stability and novelty. My coach, he likes the frame love and will. That's why I was using the word will there. So will for masculine and love for feminine, and like whatever. That's from some Italian guy. I can't remember the Italian guy's name. It's like, it doesn't really matter what that is. But it's like, as soon as people have acknowledged the polarity and that there are these two kinds of energy, then in a way they've already won, right? That's why that thing that you've just said is so important. Like as soon as you're consciously doing this, there's a new level of thing happening for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so just so that people understand, the language I use is probably most commonly referred to within the quantum physics space, because quantum physics talks about that sort of it's the unified field, but within the unified field, there's the different polarities, the different charge of particles that then, magnetize, come together, create the whole blah, 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 and so on. So that's what that belongs to. Yeah. So it's not, what I'm trying to say is that it's not the romanticized Romeo and Juliet version of it. It's actually,
Yeah, but I also don't.
but
I
so
like,
be it.
like I don't. The romanticized Romeo and Juliet version, not so much. But the fact that cultures have been talking about masculine and feminine polarity for millennia,
yeah,
tells us there's something useful there for most people, I would say.
yeah. It's really it's really empowering. Like for me, well, first of all, the more I understood, the more I knew, the more I embodied, the more I knew that I knew very little in the scheme of things.
Right.
But as I understood and I could apply this ancient wisdom consciously in my world, even if it was just a tiny little thing every day, it felt so empowering. There is no way that there's room for clinical anxiety, panic attack, or extreme amounts of like overproduction of cortisol stress level when there is this knowing within me that I'm choosing something that really kicks ass, that I've done. It's going to create something really awesome.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. So it's this really lovely kind of loop of, physiology, the physiology, the reduction of cortisol production, the increase of, the good shit, quite frankly, the endorphins and the serotonin and the dopamine and all of that, but that we create internally as a direct result of choosing an act or consciously choosing something and then seeing it play out, or seeing it create, is incredibly, in my experience, incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, it's like I think about it sometimes as like, it's just, yeah, there is something really, it's like seeing an insight, a truth about the world, and then using it to help me have a better life. You're absolutely right. There is like that. There is an amazing cycle that happens at that point, and I guess that's because some people watching or listening to this may be. I think I would have struggled with this much before I kind of was ready for it, right?
Sure.
And so there's a way in which some people listening to this, it might be like, what, because we don't really get taught.
How do you get there?
what is this? How do we get there? And so it is that important. I think you're making, like, what you're pointing to is probably really important, which is, or one of the things you're pointing to loads of interesting things, is if we can notice these different parts of ourselves, for example, we don't have to be run by them. We don't have to become something because of that. When we notice them, we just have that little bit more power to choose, like, how we respond in a situation. And that's, as we learn and grow. And, for me, I like the philosopher Ken Wilber has a great phrase about growth, which is transcend and include. And it's like, that's what it's like, really. Like, I get to, when when I started to consciously tap into the more masculine parts of me, it allowed me to be everything I was before that, like I include it, but also transcend and have access to slightly more of myself. And that allowed for, all I'll say is that allowed for me to be more often who I would really like to be, and generally have a more, what we say, like flourishing experience of life.
Yeah. I sort of call that the journey to your fullest potential, because you're already that, but you just have to consciously remember so that you can be it in every moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's super. Now, I wanna invite you to please talk to us about your books, because there's a number of them, and would you please expand a little bit more on this, what you created and why books?
Yeah, well, so basically where the books came from is after 3 years of that blog, so of writing a blog post every week in 12 minutes, I thought it'd be funny that I could they were mostly posted on LinkedIn, because that felt like the safest place to post blogs, because people I knew didn't really read LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is a really hard place for me to find my own blogs, let alone for other people to find my blogs. So I realized, like, it would actually be if someone wanted to read all my blog, it would actually be really hard. And there were a few people who I thought might want to do that. So, and someone I was following had just published a book of a load of their blog. So I thought I could publish a book of my blog, and I could call it, I wrote this book in 12 minutes, which I thought was funny.
Clever.
And then I spoke to my friend Steve about it, who's an editor, and said, like, will you help me with this? And he was like, yes. And he said, it's a great title, because it makes me think, if you wrote a book in 12 minutes, I better get on with doing the things that I claim to want to do. And then he asked a great question, which is, can the book itself, if we publish this book of your blog, can the book itself help people with that same thing? And this is where it started to get really interesting. And this is like why a creative practice is a particularly great thing to have, because it turned out I had 80,000 words, like I said before, from 3 years of writing. What was interesting at this point was I actually had 80,000 words about something, because it turned out, so what I did was I sat down with my coach at the time, a woman called Katie Harvey, and we thought together about, or she helped me think about, what are the stages of doing a thing that we really want to do but haven't been doing? Like, what do we have to do the thing? And I then sat down with these blog posts from the 3 years, the 80,000 words, and I dealt them out. And it turned out I dealt out almost exactly into these 4 phases of the creative process that I'd identified. And this was kind of magical. I was like, well, what the hell has happened here? Like, why have I written about this? And then I looked back and thought, well, it's obvious, isn't it? Because if you have a 12-minute writing practice, it is essentially, on some level, a really pure creative practice, because there's not really time to think about what I'm going to write about in 12 minutes or on the train. So I'm just writing about what's most interesting to me. And in a way, I think we can think about what's most interesting to me today is a great way to tap into our intuition, or the deeper parts of ourselves. So I've been writing about what was important to me and what I was working on. And what I was working on for myself was starting my business, this writing practice, being more creative, getting out of my own way. And I was working on building a coaching business. So I was coaching people, and coaching is really just helping people finally do the things they've wished they'd done already, but haven't done for some reason. And so that was, of course, what I've been writing about. And that's where the 4 books came from. They became 4 books in the end, because I felt like, well, partly for a business strategy, it's better publishing business model to have a series of books than one. But I had to really listen to myself. I don't really let my business be run by business strategies. I try and let it be run by what I think is the right thing to do. But when I really slowed down, I thought, is this better as one long book or 4 separate ones? And I decided it was better as 4 separate ones, because some people might struggle with the whole of the creative process, but some people might struggle with different parts of it. And so if somebody really struggles with the first part, which is starting the thing, whatever the thing is, they can just buy the start book. So the first book is called How to Start When You're Stuck. The second phase of the creative process, the second book, is How to Keep Going When You Want to Give Up. The third part is how to create the conditions for great work, and the fourth part is how to share what you've made. And those are the 4 books in the series, and they're all out now. The fourth one just came out just a week or 2 ago.
Okay, so this episode, I'm actually going to say that we are pre-recording this. So when this episode comes out next week on Tuesday, I'm going to air it next week. Then I will include all the links and everything to this, because I have them from your email, so that people know how to get your books and where to find you and how to talk to you if they want your help and all of those things. So I'm really, it's one way that, I can give back to you for your amazing work and your time here with me today. Hang on, let me just put my laptop on charge to make sure that we don't suddenly
That's the great
lose
thing
all
about
this.
live recording. I can tell we're still recording live, right? For people who are watching, it's like it's important to say that. That's why when stuff falls off the table, or you have to plug in the laptop. Exactly.
Yeah. I wanted to say how much I love this particular creative process that you describe, because as soon as you started talking, I'm like, yeah, he got out of his own way. He got the ego mind out of the way so that the ego mind wasn't perceiving, maybe threat or danger or fear or any of those, survival triggers. Yeah. You're on mute at the moment, sweetheart.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah, so that's really great. But what I wanted to ask you in closing, because can you believe we're already at an hour? Seriously, that felt like 5 minutes for me. And there's so much more that I could talk to you about.
Same.
But well, 2 things actually. So the first one was when you were talking about how you're making, what I understood was you were consciously choosing to do things your way rather than necessarily the way things are usually done in business. Yeah, tell me about that, because I think that that's really gold.
Yeah. So there's so many ways we could think about this, but one of the most useful things. So I finally got values, Diana, like about 2 years ago, really late to the party. I finally understood why they matter. Here's why. So for anyone who doesn't get it, like I knew that it was important to think about our values, but I didn't really get it. And so for anyone else who's in that same place, it's like, why is everyone banging on about values? Here it is.
Yeah.
We can't control the outcomes in our lives, right? There's so many outcomes, we just can't control them. We can kid ourselves that we do, and it just leads to mostly stress. So we can't control the outcomes. Here's what we can control. We can control whether we live our life in line with our values. And the great way to think about that is, what at the end of our life or the end of a day do you need to do so that regardless of the outcomes, you feel at peace with yourself? And that's life in alignment with values. So what do I need to do so that at the end of my life, regardless of the outcomes in the external world, I feel at peace with myself? That is success. This is what Fred Kaufman, who's a guy who I've learned loads from, would call success beyond success. And another way of thinking about that is I'm interested, partly because of the author David Gemmell, in the concept of honor. And one of the ways I think about honor, it's the same thing, right, that I've just been talking about, but it's doing the right thing even when it's hard to do the right thing. That's honor. And honor is, being at peace with ourselves at the end of our lives. So that's it, really. Like, that means that but it's also good business. So I learned it, really. I don't think I started doing this kind of stuff because of that. I've learned that later. I started doing it because it's good business, because I had some bad experiences where I kind of did what I thought I was supposed to do, even what my own contract, for example, would say I should do with a client. And it was the wrong thing to do. And it meant that, for example, in that, one client, I did what I went for what the contract that we had between us said we should do about some money when we finished the engagement early and that kind of thing. It was exactly the wrong thing to do. The reason I knew that was I felt it was wrong, and also it was bad business because it meant I got like an extra 100 or £200 then, but I lost the chance for referral. Broke the relationship with the person, so I lost a chance for referrals, for future work. All these things were lost. So good business is also keeping your business, everything open for the long term. So do things for the right reasons now, because it's always better for relationships in the long term.
That's so important, because I think when it comes to values, people that are employed by other people in organizations, we lose it. We switch off.
It's much easier to hit on something you're saying, and to say it's much easier to do what I've just said when you work for yourself.
Yeah.
And harder in organizations. You're competing with an extra thing, an extra energy in the situation then, and now it's really important to say that.
Yes,
but it's not.
It is.
But in a way, I think what you're pointing at is it's probably even more important to do it then, because we can lose ourselves in an organization.
Yeah, and organizations then get away with all manner of evil, unfortunately, let's face it. Yeah. Because they pay our salaries, so we sort of, and I've done it. I'm not saying anything that I haven't done myself. We sort of capitulate our values and our sense of integrity often when it comes to working for other people. Perhaps until we either know better or have more courage.
Yeah.
Or can make a difference or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's hard because staying true to your values doesn't guarantee that you get the results that you want, the outcomes that you want. But we only get one life. And personally, but this is my choice. Personally, I'd rather get sacked than wake up in 30 years and realize I've just compromised myself for the last few decades working for somebody who I should have stood up to a long time ago, or whatever it is. But that's my choice, and that's partly why I choose to work for myself, because it allows me to do that a lot more.
It's exactly the reason why I've been self-employed in my own practice since 2005. That has a lot to do with it. I found it really difficult to compromise myself in any kind of helping profession.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also should say there are lots of great people. I learned a lot from Fred Kaufman on this, but there are lots of other people, like some of the work that I do with clients, you can get help from somebody to lead with honor in your life without having to compromise yourself as much as you might feel like you are now. And if people want that help, I love giving that help, but there are lots of, I mentioned Fred Kaufman, his book, The Meaning Revolution is where I learned a lot of stuff from that. There's lots of other good people writing. Another good one is Jim Detmer and Diana Chapman and Kaylee Klemp, their book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. There are these little silos out there of people doing work to try and help us all do the thing we've just been talking about, even if we're in an organization where it can be much harder. Can be much harder. I mean, it can be hard to do it when you're working for yourself as well, because you sometimes need some money and you might want to compromise who you are to get that money right now, which is not necessarily the wrong decision, because sometimes we need to pay our rent.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, absolutely. I guess the point that we are making is that it's important for those considerations to stay alive rather than completely turn our backs to self and our own values. Yeah. Even if it means that it's a little bit like this, it's fine. Right. Because it's how life is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, Mr. Robbie, let me ask you in closing, where to now? How are you growing as a person? How are you growing in your business? How are you growing in your life? What are you up to?
It's a really good question, because the answer is really in alignment with one of the threads of the conversation. So to get these books out has been a massive act of will. It's required the lightning bolt of my masculine energy and the never giving up of that part of me. And the next part is absolutely the opposite of that. The next part is at least for the next few months I need to create some space. I need to create space for things to emerge, for the visions to come, for the next things to show themselves. And so we'll see what that looks like. Practically, it probably looks like, I mentioned one bit before, following interest rather than following what's important. Some space, more time off, some retreats, those kind of things. So we'll see what happens, but that's what's next. And I don't really know what that'll look like practically. I mean, my stuff is carrying on. The books will still be there. I'm sure I'll be having conversations with, I hope I'll be having conversations with people, very interesting people like you, like I am now. But in terms of, if you'd asked me that in the last few years, there would have been a masculine energy response of, here are the most important things for the next year that I am going to be making sure happen. But the next, right in this moment, we'll see.
I love that. Yeah, just allowing for things to present. And then you'll recognize them. You'll know. You seem like to have a pretty good fine-tuned kind of intuition, radio antenna.
Through practice, though. Let's be really clear about this. Some of it may be from that upbringing I had, from who I am, and the I don't know, genetics of me. But some of it is practice. Like, I've really practiced it. And the reason that's important to say is that people listening or watching can practice as well.
Yeah.
Practice listening to intuition. Practice listening for what matters.
Yeah. Because that practice, it's not like intuition is not there, but I find that the more I practice it or implement it, implement the practice of, like, even stillness seems like a really passive thing as a as sort of maybe part of the nature of the feminine charge, feminine energy, because feminine is more still and receptive, magnetic. But the truth is that so much happens in stillness.
Yeah.
That observer perspective, the being able to be still and then observe what's playing out is I don't even know what you would call it, but it's still very much an active space. Yeah.
Lovely.
And I'm clarifying that because unfortunately people, many people think of stillness as or maybe they associate stillness as you're not doing anything, maybe lazy a little bit, or right? But that's not it at all. It's actually so important, because that's when the inner self, that wisdom, that inner guidance, the intuition, even creativity, imagination, you can turn the volume up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find that stillness in all kinds of ways. And it's a practice it's another thing worth practicing.
Yeah, cool. Robbie, any closing words, my darling, before we finished?
No, it's been a total pleasure. Thanks for, just guiding the conversation. It's been, I've loved just finding out where it would go.
I love this. It brings me such a joy. I think it's so magical and such an honor and a blessing, genuinely, to have this sort of an organic, beautiful conversation with you and other people as well. Okay, so on that note, dear audience, if you're still with us at 1 hour and 15, wow, thank you. I hope you get lots out of this conversation. I will of course, share all the relevant links to Robbie so that you can connect with him directly, can follow him on all the social media and website. And please support him by purchasing his books, because you will no doubt get a ton out of them.
I hope so. And if you do, let me know. Please let me know as well.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to stop recording, but just stay in the studio, Robbie, okay? All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.